Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and I am a Canadian knitter living in the beautiful northeast of England. And today I only have one project to talk to you about, but I have a lot to say about it, and I think it's going to be really fun. So the one project that I have to talk to you about is this one, and it is a project that I've talked about casting on. I've mentioned that I planned to knit this. So this is the Roosty tank by Ella Gordon. It is a Fair Isle pattern, and the pattern calls for Jamieson and Smith 4-ply, so woolen spun Shetlandic 4-ply. And if you've been with me before, you may be looking at this and saying, these are not the colors that you planned. And they are absolutely not. So I thought that I would talk you through what I was planning, why I changed my mind, how I've ended up with this quite scrappy, I think fun, scrappy fun, I'm calling it kind of my bluebell Roosty, kind of inspired by bluebell blues and purples. And I thought I would talk to you about how I arrived at those colors, but also some of how I've started kind of swatching electronically, swatching with Google Sheets before I swatch with my needles and yarn, just to try to save time, save yarn a little bit, save money a little bit. And I end up using Microsoft Paint a ton for choosing color work these days. So I thought I would talk through all of that with you, and hopefully that will be as much fun for you as it will be for me. Okay, so if you've been with me before, you'll know that I was very much planning to stick to Ella Gordon's colors, the colors that she uses in her sample for this project, for this design. But the kind of titular Roosty colors, the rusty red colors, there's a kind of dark rust color and a lighter rust color, just aren't my colors, and they wouldn't fit in my wardrobe. So I was thinking that I would go with greens. I was thinking this both because I wear blues and greens together a lot, so that would work really well in my wardrobe. And I'm not sure if I told you this, but I had this kind of idea of the same way that she talked about the colors looking like the sea and kind of rusty iron in the sea around Shetland. I was thinking about kind of the sea colors and sea lettuce, which is this kind of fabulous bright green seaweed that I know is found in North America, in Canada, in all sorts of places, so you may be familiar with this as well, but I was kind of thinking that I would make a sea lettuce Roosty tank. So what I did initially, and what I often do when I'm trying to figure out colors, though I've never worked with as many colors as this before, is I took one of the pictures of the pattern and put that in Microsoft Paint. And then I went to the Jamieson and Smith website, since that's that's the yarn that this pattern calls for, and I took little screenshots, little excerpts of each of the colors that the pattern calls for, and arranged them next to the pattern picture in Microsoft Paint in an order that kind of made sense to my brain. And then that kind of gave me a starting point. So I was planning initially to hold on to the kind of turquoise colors, the blue colors, the teals, I guess. It's a better term than either turquoise or blue in this case, the teals, but swapping out greens. So I laid in different greens and was kind of looking for greens that appealed to me visually, but also replicated the kind of the fonceur, the darkness of the rust colors. So a lighter green and a darker green. This worked really well, and I was feeling pretty confident about this and pretty pleased with it. So the next step for me was then to go over into Excel, Microsoft Excel, or Google Spreadsheet, Google Sheets is it called, or Spreadsheet? I can never remember. But whichever one of those, the online version is free. And I went over and used the exact chart from the pattern. By this point I had bought the pattern, so I used the exact chart from the pattern and replicated the colors on there. Now, I absolutely used to do this one square at a time, changing the colors on my own. And that works great, but it is incredibly tedious. So I have since found a video by, and I'm just going to double check, by CorryMeadow, which I will link below, where they talk through how to use conditional formatting to do this. And oh my gosh, does this make life easier. So the way that conditional formatting works is basically that you can put whatever value you want in a square on Microsoft Excel or on Google Sheets. And then you can assign, in the case of colourwork, we would want to assign a color to that letter or symbol or number or whatever it is, right? So to keep my life simple, I just go A, B, C, D, E, and onwards as many colors as I need. But what this really allows you to do is to change the color associated with that letter without having to redo the chart. If this sounds overwhelming explained out loud, I think this would definitely overwhelm me. I would encourage you to go watch CorryMeadow's video because it's like really straightforward, it's well explained. I find this kind of stuff very intimidating when I first do it, and this video made it really straightforward for me. But I have an extra little trick that I can't take credit for. This trick came from my partner, and I use it with absolute joy because it's so helpful, I think. And this extra little trick is to use the color picker, which is that little, it's like an eyedropper, you know, the symbol for like an eyedropper, so the color picker in Microsoft Paint, to go and pick the color from those photos that I've taken from the, in this case, Jamieson and Smith website, so the exact color of each yarn. And then if you go to the kind of color board in Microsoft Paint, you get a code for that specific color. And you can take that code and paste it into your conditional formatting, which means that your chart then is not just an approximation of the colors that you're hoping to achieve, but pretty close to the exact colors. Now, I do find, you know, I've spent a lot of hours doing this over the last couple of weeks, and I do find that one of the tricky things about doing this with yarn colors, and with yarn that's been photographed well, is that of course the yarn is going to have lowlights and highlights, right? Parts of each strand of yarn that are more exposed to light are going to be a bit lighter, and parts that are in shadow are going to be a bit darker. The best solution I could find for this was just kind of trying to use the eyedropper, the color picker, to get the kind of best approximation of what the color looks like overall to me for the yarn. But also, once I paste the color code for the color into my conditional formatting, then you can use the kind of, there's a bar with the color where it's lighter and darker, and I just kind of fiddle around with that until I get something that feels as close as possible. It's not an exact science, of course, but it is amazingly helpful in my experience, at least. I find it amazingly helpful to kind of get some of that initial color swatching done without having to buy all of these individual yarns. So I did that with the blues and the greens, and I am not at all accomplished in color theory. Every time I start putting colors together, I am reminded how much I do not have a fine arts background. Or maybe it's just not a good mind for predicting how things are going to look next to each other. And I found that I actually didn't love the greens and the blues that I had picked next to each other. The greens just didn't pop the way that the rusty colors did. And I think this is partially because the teal blues are already leaning kind of green, right? A teal is kind of farther to the green side of blue than it is to the red-purple side of blue. So it just wasn't popping the way that I wanted. That was fine. I next went looking at other people's Ravelry pages. And I don't know what it is, but once I decided not to go with the greens that I had been planning, kind of the whole plan that I had had became less stable. And I was looking through the Ravelry project pages and wondering why I didn't change the base colors as well, why I didn't change the teals. And I think initially I hadn't wanted to do this because I've never done all over Fair Isle colorwork before. I've done two-stranded colorwork, but usually just with 2 colors, or sometimes with a handful of colors, but you know, never anything like this, never anything where the color theory is going to matter so much, where the colors are going to influence each other so much and influence the way that they look as a whole. So I talked myself into being brave and I decided to abandon all of the colors from the sample project and choose some of my own colors. Once I decided to be a bit more adventurous with my color choices for the Roosty and depart entirely from the colors suggested in the pattern, I decided initially to try to use yarn from my stash. I have quite a bit of 4-ply yarn, quite a bit of fingering yarn in my stash, and have been kind of dreaming of using it for color work, but had initially, you know, as I said before, I initially thought that I would stick to the suggested colors just for the kind of safety of knowing that it would turn out all right. But one of the other advantage of using stash yarn is that I wouldn't be, you know, shelling out an amount of money to do this for the first time, so then if the colors didn't look absolutely gorgeous together, it felt slightly lower stakes. You know, lots of this yarn was yarn that I love but have had for a while and have been looking for a way to use it, so this felt like a great way to do that. So the first color that I really thought that I would use, and that I have ended up using, is this kind of gorgeous navy. It's a quite dark navy. In the viewfinder it's looking quite a bit lighter than it actually is, but it's a kind of almost a black navy. And it's really beautiful. This is from Erica Knight. It's wool local, 100% wool, and this yarn is all sourced from Yorkshire and spun in Yorkshire. I think they say an intimate blend of Blueface Leicester, BFL, and hard-wearing Masham, produced from fleece to yarn in less than 50 miles. Starting at the British wool auction in Bradford, the wool is scoured, combed, spun, dyed, steamed, and handed in the county of Yorkshire. So really local to Yorkshire. I'm not that far from Yorkshire. We're just kind of, well, we're a bit above Yorkshire, but you know, not too far as these things go. And this is a light fingering yarn. So this is 450 meters or 492 yards to 100 grams. So this was kind of my first choice, and I thought that this would make a really good main color. In my mind, this pattern has kind of 2 main colors that I wanted to establish before anything else. So this to me felt like, you know, I would use this instead of the dark teal in the sample project. The next yarn that I thought that I would use for the kind of other most significant color, the color that forms the background of the thinner stripes, is this Topsy pure sheep wool. So this is yarn that I bought. I actually have 2 hanks of this. As you can see, I did not decide to use this. This is still hanked up. But this is Topsy farm yarn from Topsy Farms in Canada. I bought this as part of making an effort to buy more Canadian yarn, to explore more Canadian yarns and Canadian yarn producers that I'm really excited about and want to support. So Topsy Farm is definitely one of those, and this again is just a pretty standard fingering weight. I think they say on the website, they don't seem to have as much information on the ball band, but I think it's a standard 400 meters per 100 grams, and it is looking, I will have to post pictures of these I think, because this is looking way more blue than it is. This is really a true teal, a real teal yarn. But obviously I decided not to go with this. So a few things happened as I started going through my electronic swatching process again. So I'm pulling these pictures together. I got pictures from the websites of both of these yarns, but I also took pictures myself just to kind of see if one or the other would be more accurate to the yarn in real life. And I started laying them out in Microsoft Paint, and I did get to the stage of swatching on Google Sheets. But a few things happened. The first is I realized that I probably wouldn't have enough of this. As is typical, I think that the Roosty pattern, the pattern page on Ravelry, the pattern itself, calls for calls for quite a buffer of yarn. It calls for more yarn than most people actually used. There are enough projects on Ravelry that several people had uploaded kind of exact grammage, exact weight and measurements of how much they used of each color. And this was kind of going to be on the border, but I don't like playing yarn chicken, and I feel like for my first Fair Isle project, this was going to be enough of an adventure. I didn't want to add yarn chicken on top of it. So that's the first thing that happened to kind of change my utopic idea of just using scrap yarn, or stash yarn rather. So maybe not enough of the wool local from Ericanite. The other thing that occurred to me is, this feels quite a bit thicker than the wool local, which has ended up being true of some of the other yarns, and I think is actually okay. But the bigger problem with this is I have 2 hanks of it, and I was realizing that I would be tapping into this and using probably half of a hank, less than half of a hank, you know, a quarter of what I have on this vest. Whereas if I keep the 2 hanks together, I have enough to make, you know, a garment, a vest entirely out of this entirely. And so that seemed like maybe not the best forethought to use this without knowing what I would do with the remaining amount. Whereas with 2 of these, when I bought it, I was thinking that I could make another Waiting for Rain shawl was one of my plans. I could make a vest. You know, there are all sorts of things I could do with 2 of these, but with 1.5, slightly less. So that kind of cut this out of the running. The third thing that happened, and that was really serendipitous and really exciting, is that I managed to snag some vintage Shetland wool in a series of blue and green colors online secondhand. These are all weird amounts, unlabeled. I have no idea what colors they were, but they came from, on the online listing, you know, the person said that they guaranteed that it came from the Shetland wool industry, and they worked in the Shetland wool industry, and I kind of don't know if it's a violation of privacy to share this, but I kind of thought, oh, like, their username kind of, it looks like it might be an abbreviation for Ella Gordon. And anyways, I you know, bought up what I could of what they were destashing, and when it arrived in the mail with the return name on it, it was from Ella Gordon. So that seems very serendipitous and exciting. And so those were the kind of 3 things that really changed me from using existing stash yarn and still replicating the number of colors in the sample project to making more of a scrappy project. But I didn't decide on this initially because I basically needed to like talk myself into this a little bit, because even though the scrap yarn is just scrap yarn, and it wasn't terribly expensive, it does feel to me really precious. And it feels really precious because I can't replicate it, right? I can't buy more of it. It's vintage. I have no idea what the colors are. And where I'm less likely to get precious about a really expensive yarn, something like that I can really get kind of sentimental about. And you know, I didn't want to use it on a project that I wouldn't love because of my own inexperience, or maybe problems with my tension, or just inexperience of putting the colors together. So I had to give myself a bit of a pep talk. But I did give myself a pep talk, and the pep talk essentially came down to, it's just knitting. I mean, it's knitting, you know, it matters so much to me. If you're watching this, if you're still watching this far in, I imagine that knitting matters to some degree to you as well, or crafting matters to you to some degree as well. Textiles and textile history. So, you know, knitting is very important to me, but it's also just knitting. You know, it wouldn't be the end of the world if I didn't do the most amazing job with these scrap yarns in the whole world. Part of what freaks me out about all of this is, of course, you know, that I was planning on with Farrell, you do end up with all these cut pieces of yarn. And so, you know, every once in a while you'll hear people talk about how if you have to scrap back, you just, you know, you've lost all that yarn. And to a certain extent that might be true. And it would be, but it would be, you know, it would be tedious, but you could splice them together. So this was another part of my pep talk to myself, was that if I really hate it, I could still frog and reclaim the yarn. It would be very tedious. I would lose a little bit of yardage, but I could do it. So that's what I decided to do. And I am really, really pleased with it. So far at least. So now I was decided that I was going to use some yarn from Stash. I still definitely wanted to use this. There certainly wasn't enough scrap in what I purchased to make a whole vest. It was only ever going to be scrappy bits supplemented with other things from Stash. So I decided on all of that, but I still needed an accent color. I still needed to replace the kind of roosty colors, the rust colors. And I knew that greens weren't really what I was going for anymore in this kind of blue teal spectrum. And so I thought of purples. And I thought of purples partially because not long ago, well, I guess it's been a couple of months now, but one of the first times that I really left the house for fun reasons, and in the whole saga with my health, was to go down to the seaside with a friend who was visiting, and it was peak bluebell season. So we got to see beautiful kind of pink and blue and purple bluebells growing right next to the sea. And I have some lovely, or I have some pictures of this. It was an absolutely lovely scene. The pictures are not great. The pictures are okay, but there was lots of shadow and light going on, and I was quite shaky and overwhelmed by being out of doors in a good way. The pictures are not amazing, but I will share them with you, and I was thinking of those colors. And so purple seemed like the way to go. And I did lots more electronic swatching, trying out lots of different purples, mainly from Jamieson & Smith. I thought that that would be appropriate. And I also stuck to Jamieson & Smith because in another kind of celebratory first for me in a long time, I didn't buy the contrast colors online. It's the first yarn I've bought in person since I became really ill. So my partner kindly helped me get to the yarn store. It was a little, our local yarn store. It was a little bit tricky because I mainly need to use my wheelchair when I leave the house these days. I can't walk very far without really causing myself problems, pain and crashing and all of that stuff. And my local yarn store, like a lot of, you know, small businesses, just doesn't have space for a wheelchair. So that was a little bit tricky, but we brought a little camping stool and I had my cane, and we just kind of walked me around the store and put the stool down and I would sit. We did go on a weekend, but luckily it wasn't too busy, and everyone else in the store was just lovely and really accommodating. And luckily the store owner, who I've met before and chatted with before, was as lovely as ever and didn't seem to mind that we were kind of this odd installation moving around the store. And so we did this partially because I remembered from before I became really ill that my local yarn store, the local yarn store that is closest to me, we don't live quite as close to it as we used to do, but it is still the closest yarn store, carries Jamieson & Smith. So we went, and I found this gorgeous purple, which was not on the plan. Unfortunately, they did not have the purple. They don't carry the full range of Jamieson & Smith colors, which is fairly typical, I think, of local yarn stores because there are a lot of colors and space is tight. But, you know, the joy of being able to pick colors in person, I found a substitution. So, let me show you these ball bands. So, the substitution that I went with, instead of, I think it was the the lilac color from Jamieson and Smith that I was aiming for, I ended up with this color instead, which is from Bahram U, from their Pip Colourwork series, which again are 25-gram balls. They are worsted spun instead of woolen spun, and I can definitely tell that as I'm knitting with it, but I'm already mixing, this is also worsted spun, I'm already mixing lots of worsted and woolen spun yarns, and that seems to be working fine, and I thought this color was perfect. I didn't actually notice until we got home and I went to enter the I went to start the project and enter the colors into my Ravelry project page that this color is called Bluebell. So I thought that was really appropriate and was not planned at the time. I did not plan to buy this purple. I have some black yarn in my stash and some dark gray yarn, and I was planning on using those in place of what I've ended up using the purple. But just as going into a local yarn store is absolutely lovely, because if you don't find exactly what you're looking for, the substitutions are right there and you can look at them and see the colors and, you know, all of that. Local yarn stores are also, as I'm sure you know, dangerous, because then there are gorgeous colors that you hadn't considered. And so I did see this and just think, I have to try. And of course I hadn't swatched with this or done any electronic swatching or anything like that, but it was just too good to pass up. And I figured that even if it didn't work, I would find something else for it. So I bought that, and that is, am I gonna remember which one is which? Yes. So this is the color, the dark purple is FC56. And it's actually a dark purple with some greens in it. So I just think that that goes really well with my other colors. Now, the other thing that I bought while I was at the local yarn store was this kind of tealy green color, and this is called, this is the color 625, and it's just called green on here. Color 65. And the reason I bought this is because the color that I decided to use to substitute for the Topsy Farm Teal was this kind of much more greeny yarn. It's still a teal, I would say, but it's much more on the green spectrum than this. This is much more blue. This was the yarn in the scraps that I had the most of. I spent quite a bit of time weighing all of the yarns, and this was the one that I had the most of, which worked out really well because it's also the color that I liked the most. But I definitely wasn't going to have enough of just this, and I thought that this was a good approximation. They're different enough to be interesting, but from a distance they don't scream being totally different. So I bought 2 of each of those. Where did I put these? So I bought 2 of each of these and headed home, and I did some more electronic swatching with the new purple, and then I did my first physical swatching, and that is this here. And at this stage, you'll see I've used the kind of dark purple in here and in the center of the motifs, but I was still using a dark gray for the center motif here. And I just thought that it looked maybe a little bit dark. And one thing that I definitely had lots of in the scrap yarns are some lighter colored scraps. Is there a way for me to show these to you nicely? There we go. So I did a bit more electronic swatching. Are you tired of me talking about the electronic swatching yet? I did a bit more electronic swatching. I did not swatch any of this physically. I just kind of thought I would go for it. And so far it has been turning out okay. So that's lots of preamble before I show you the actual project. So let's turn to the actual project. Okay, so here we are. One other color technicality that I forgot to mention is the way that I decided to handle not having enough of the navy blue color. And what I decided to do with that was to use two different blues to for the background of the kind of more circular pattern. So this one, which is more like a star or maybe like a flower, I've decided to keep with the navy background. And then for this, I've got a kind of cluster of 3 yarns that are close enough to each other that I think that I can use those together to do these. And then I've just started now with a royal blue, a really bright royal blue. And so I'm just adding that on now. And it's been a real adventure. I'm loving it so much. That's not to say that it's not without its occasional stresses. Each time I add in a new color, I do think, oh my god, it's ruined it. I started with the royal blue last night and I thought, oh my god, I hate it. The royal blue is no good. But this morning I like it again, and almost inevitably, once I'm done the full band, the full chart repeat, I like it and it all works out. One thing that I really appreciated about all of the electronic swatching, so I did the swatching with each of these colors. I had all sorts of different tabs going on, and what I did before I cast on was I took just little slivers of each of those and laid them on top of each other in a sequence. I will have to figure out how I can show you that without, because obviously I've done all of this in the pattern and I don't want to share the pattern with you because that's, it's proprietary, that's for the pattern. But maybe I'll find a way to show you how I did that. And I was really pleased to be able to do that with all of the different background colors, because one thing that felt really important as I was doing all of this scrappy work was to make sure that the vest would in some way feel balanced. Especially because the navy is so much darker than the other colors. And, here these colors blend together a bit more. I've got as the background colors, I've got the Jamieson and Smith green. Then I've got, one of those light blues from the scraps, and then that kind of tealy green from the scraps. And they have a lot less contrast with each other than, of course, the navy blue does, and a lot less contrast than the royal blue does. So I should be able to do two rows of this kind of lighter blue and two bands, rather, not rows, 2 bands of the lighter blue and 2 bands of the royal blue. And part of how I'm trying to make all of this work is I have been weighing the yarns obsessively. So I have a spreadsheet for myself. I never thought a single pattern would involve so many spreadsheets, but I do have a spreadsheet going where I am tracking how much yarn I use in each band, and that is helping to assuage some of my anxieties about having enough of each of these yarns, because of course that was always going to be a little bit up in the air. And I'm just kind of trying to trust in the fun scrappiness of it. It is feeling very joyous. There have been a few surprises. For instance, lots of this vintage yarn feels thinner than the Jamieson and Smith that I bought myself. Feels a bit thinner than the contemporary Jamieson and Smith. But then the royal blue is way thicker. I don't know why. I don't know what that is. It feels thicker and much denser, I guess, when I lay them next to each other. Is there a way for me to do this easily? Not really. No, even when I lay them next to each other, I'll have to put up a picture for you. The royal blue is definitely thicker, and it doesn't compress as much. I wonder if this one is maybe worsted spun. So I'm a bit concerned about that. I haven't finished the band yet. I'll have to see if that's a really noticeable bump. I don't really have another scrap yarn to swap in, but you know, I certainly don't mind going back to my LYS and buying another band of some other kind of blue. I could even, you know, I do like the kind of pop of royal blue color. I think it's growing on me from last night when I was scared of it. I'm liking it. So I could even go back, and the Jameson and Smith line definitely has a royal blue, so I could do that. So there's definitely a little bit of trial and error and going by the seat of my pants, but I'm enjoying knitting this more than I've enjoyed knitting anything all year, I think. And I've really enjoyed my knitting this year. I've been really enjoying it. But oh my god, it's so Moorish. I'm a little bit obsessed. So to give you context, I cast this on the 17th of June, and it is now the 25th of June. So it really hasn't been very long. I know for some people that probably wouldn't be very fast. It's a lot faster than I expected to be, and it's a lot faster than really I probably should be going for my hands. But it's just so Moorish. Like, I just want to keep going. And that's a really good sign to me, because I have to admit, anytime I have a problem with tension or anything like that, I do have the thought that, oh, you know, I should save this, I should stop knitting this, and I should save it until I'm better at color work. Or I should save this until my hands are a bit better. We have now had some quite warm weather. The UK is having a pretty extreme heat wave, especially in the south. I mean, my goodness, it's, you know, it's a real danger to health when it gets that hot. I have real heat intolerance, which is, I did not know that there was a term for heat intolerance until quite recently, but I've always had heat intolerance, and my joints and everything really flares up with the heat. So I have been having issues with my tension. Part of me still thinks that maybe I should put this down and wait until the autumn when I'm less likely to struggle with my tension. But you know what? I'm loving it, and I don't want to stop knitting it. So I'm just going to keep going with it for now. This navy section in particular, I knit this navy section 3 times. I wasn't sure if I was going to share that with you, or if I was just going to gloss over it. But you know what? It's better to be honest, right? I knit this this band 3 times, and I knit it 3 times because the first 2 times my hands were really swollen, and I was being stubborn, and I just kept knitting, and it was so loose. The stitches were visibly loose the first time I knit it, and it was bugging me, and I kept knitting, and I knew I should have stopped, so I finally did stop and ripped back, and the second time I did it, they were even longer. The stitches were even looser. And I know that because I had to spit splice on some more yarn, because I had already cut it, and I went back, and it was even longer. So I went back again, and now I think it's probably a little bit too tight because I overcompensated. But you know what? I think you can't tell anymore. I think visually it looks okay. If you can tell, maybe don't tell me. No, you can absolutely tell me. But I think it looks okay, and I'm just trying to take this as an exercise in fun and play, because it really has been fun to play with the colors. And I'm trying not to be too much of a perfectionist. Easier said than done. Yes. The other thing that has given me a little bit of a heart attack, which I think is actually fine, but I made it like quite far before I was looking at this the other day and thought, oh my gosh, look at how much it's scrunching up down here. That's terrible. My tension at the beginning is terrible. I thought my tension was okay. The tension is certainly harder. I find I have to pay more attention to my tension when I'm using the worsted spun yarns than the woolen spun yarns, which I think is a fairly common experience. That's one of the reasons that woolen spun yarn is so recommended for color work, because the yarn puffs up and fills out and is less slippery and just a bit easier to manage all around. So I am more conscious of my tension when I am using the navy yarn, especially because it's quite a smooth, slippery yarn. But I thought I'd been okay at the beginning. And I did have a real panic about it before I, realized the obvious and reminded myself that it's because the ribbing is pulling it in. And if you pull the ribbing out, then it's fine. So it's been an adventure, but it's been an adventure that has been really, really, really fun. And I think, hopefully, I shouldn't say I hope that even if it's not perfect, I'll be able to remember how much fun I've had with this. And there will be more scraps in the future just because I'm hoping to knit lots more Fair Isle, and will make my own scraps and can make future scrappy projects. So I'm feeling really pleased about this. Modifications. I have made one major modification so far, and it is because my gauge is different from that stipulated in the pattern. Reading through the Ravelry pages, it seems like most people find Ella Gordon's gauge quite tight. She recommends that you knit this on 3.5mm needles and achieve a gauge of 32 stitches by 32 rows. I decided, I was really torn because I'm usually a tight knitter. I was really torn about what needles to use for my initial swatching and what ended up being my only swatching, so this single physical swatch. And I decided finally to go for 3.5mm needles. I usually size up because I am a tight knitter, but based on lots of other people commenting that Ella Gordon seemed to be a tight knitter, I thought that maybe I would be close to her. Turns out I'm a little tighter than she is even. So I am getting, in this swatch, I was getting a gauge of kind of 34 stitches by 34 stitches. It's possible that I'm even a little bit tighter in this. So I am planning on doing a mid-project block. But I'm actually not disappointed at being off gauge because this is another case that, you know, lots of us encounter all the time where I really find myself between sizes. The second size of this pattern, which is the sample size, the size that the model is wearing in the pictures, the second size is too small for me. It would be negative ease on my bust. But the next size, I think it was 35.5 inches, if I recall correctly. And but the next size up is 42 and a half or 42 and a quarter inches. And that's a bit bigger than I would like it to be. I've been wearing some of the other vests that I've knit, and I'm realizing that I don't want too much positive ease with my vests. So actually, having a gauge that's slightly tighter than is called for in the pattern is hopefully going to work out quite well. I've done the math for 34 stitches. I've also done the math in case this is a bit tighter, and either way I think it's going to work out fine. I'm knitting the size 3, so the size that should give me a 42 and a bit bust circumference, and it will come out somewhere between the first and the second and third sizes and give me something closer to what I'm looking for. Now, the third size also makes a change in the pattern in terms of length, and how it does this to achieve a bit more length is that where the version in the sample photos ends with this at the neck, so the kind of repeat, the band that is closest to the collar of the vest is this one here, the one that I've done with a navy background, and that I kind of think of as a flower motif. Maybe that's not what it is at all, but that's how I've been thinking of it. In other patterns that I've seen for the third size, it was clear that the pattern has you add on this extra band so that you end with this kind of pluses and O's, but I've been thinking of it as X's and O's, a kind of miniature version of X's and the classic Shetland X's and O's, and I think that I would rather have this color near my face, but also this pattern up near my face, up kind of, you know, the part of the pattern that people are going to look at most because it's nearest my face, and hopefully that's where people are usually looking. The way that I've decided to tackle this is that instead of adding more on to the top of the vest, I've kind of shifted everything down, if that makes sense. So where every size of the pattern has you start with the kind of X's and O's, I've started with this additional band of the star motif. I'm using that to replace the X's and O's that would go at the top. So hopefully, in theory, my vest will both start with the navy blue band and end at the neck with the navy blue band, and hopefully, I'm hoping that that will lend a bit of balance, along with having two of the kind of light blue and two of the kind of royal blue, or one band and then the royal blue on the shoulders, I think is how that's going to work out. So we'll see. I'm aware that the electronic swatching can only get me so far. I have an idea of how this will look, but we'll just have to see. My row gauge is definitely still a bit short, right? It's still about 34 stitches instead of 32 stitches, or maybe even a bit tighter than that. So it is possible that if I want this to be the same length as the size 3 calls for, I should have added an additional band, but I'm happy for this to be quite cropped. I'm planning to wear this mainly with dresses or very high-waisted trousers or skirts, so I'm happy for it to be quite cropped. I am excited, I like the visual balance of it starting and ending with the navy blue, so I'm kind of prioritizing that. And yeah, that's a lot of information to throw at you, but I'm so excited, and as you can probably tell from the way that I've babbled on at you about this, I'm feeling really invested in this. I'm feeling really immersed in it. I've had a lot of fun playing with the different colors. Even the bits that have been a little bit stressful have been kind of stressful in a positive way, if that makes sense. Do you ever feel that way? I kind of like encountering a problem and figuring it out, and it was quite fun to realize that I was gonna do the scary thing and pick my own colors and work with the scraps that feel a bit precious, and I'm a bit intimidated by it, a little tiny bit stressed by it, but I'm more excited than I am stressed, and that's a nice feeling. So, is there anything else I wanted to tell you about this? I don't think so. I'm feeling really, really good about it. As I said, it is flying along. I really wanted to film this today because it was starting to feel like if I didn't film, it would just be finished and I would never have talked to you about it in process. So I'm planning to finish this band and the next band, and that's kind of approximately where I've shifted everything down by one band, as I mentioned. But given my changes, that's where I should be starting to think of casting on the steeks for the sleeves. I may well do, I think I mentioned already, but I may well do a mid-project block before I do that. Less because of figuring out where I'm, if I'm happy with the length for the sleeves. As I said, I'm happy for this to be quite cropped, but more because the only thing that I've noticed in the other Ravelry projects that seemed like something that I wanted to hold on to and maybe change for myself was the width of the shoulders. I think based on what size people were making and whether their gauge matched Ella Gordon's or not, because I think lots of people knit at a bigger gauge than the pattern calls for. Based on what I saw, at least, I certainly didn't read through every iteration of the project, but it seemed like sometimes the bands on the shoulders, or the width of the shoulders, were too big, and other times they were a bit too small for people. And I have fairly narrow shoulders, so I'm thinking I might do a mid-project block just to really establish what my gauge is. As I said, I think I've tightened up a little bit, just trying to counter the inflammation in my hands and knowing that I'm a bit loosey-goosey and a bit less in control than usual. I think I've tightened up from I did the swatch when the weather was quite a bit cooler. It was only a difference of 24 or 48 hours, but the temperature really spiked. So I think I might do that just to really get a handle on what my gauge is, and then I can look at what the pattern calls for in terms of the shoulder width and do the math and try to figure that out for myself. But other than that, I feel like lots of the decisions have been made, and it's just about trying to enjoy the knitting and giving myself permission to rip back as much as I need. And eventually weave in the ends. So I will stop babbling at you about this. I'm tempted to keep talking about it just because I like it so much and I'm having so much fun with it. But I feel like this video has probably been quite long already. So if you're still here with me, thank you so much for hanging out with me as I talk about my first Fair Isle project. I'm enjoying it so much. If you have any Fair Isle projects that you have done or you have your eye on that you are really excited about, please do share, because I am spending far too much time on Ravelry trying to decide what my next Fair Isle project will be. I am a little bit obsessed. There's just something so satisfying about seeing the way that the colors layer together to create something so different from any of the colors individually. I'm finding that really extraordinary. So I will leave you here. I hope that you are doing well. I hope that you are managing whatever the weather is throwing at you where you are, and that you are safe and as healthy as possible, or having low symptom days if you are struggling with your health. And I will hope to speak to you soon. Thank you so much for being with me.